So what I've learned over the years in working with sales development reps, since 2015, I was one myself. I've had the privilege and fortune to be in the room where I've had to interview and decide if I'm going to hire hundreds of SDRs over the years, and I'm still currently doing it today. I've actually decoded some of the things that make for the best high performing reps, and I'm still figuring the other things out. But here's what I've learned so far. Let's talk about Carol Dweck, who wrote a book called Growth Mindset. The concept is really simple. People who are fixed in their beliefs of who they are, for example, if I think I'm a really good cold caller, but then I start struggling, I'm not going to identify that I'm struggling, and I'm not going to change. But people who have growth mindset also have something that allows them to be able to see their flaws and work on it, humility. So the first thing I look for is growth mindset, or the opposite trait that typically leads to that, which is the person humble? Or do they have a strong sense of their identity that is unshakable? We like people who are open-minded and a little bit more humble. Similar to that, I'm a very big fan of self-awareness for the same reason. And what I mean by self-awareness, this is a question I like to ask in interviews. I'll say, what's the hardest truth you've ever had to face about yourself? And how did you become aware of it? And 100% of the time, the candidate will say, oh, the hardest truth I've had to face. They're like, can I think about it? I always say yes. And usually they share something like profound and deep. And the reason I like to ask this question is to really test and see, do they have this trait that I've identified in high performance people? They're aware enough of themselves to know how they're doing. Do I need to improve something? Similar again to growth mindset. People who are unaware, we've all met them. They sort of stumble through life doing things that make people upset, doing things that just never change. We know those people, and man, maybe we've worked for those people. I have a name that's not so nice for some of them, but we won't get into that. The next thing that's like super important as a high performance trait, this is going to sound really basic. Are they actually aligned to the day-to-day job in their motivation? Now, here's the thing about motivation. People think that it is set. It's not. It's actually fickle, and it can grow and change. So great leaders know how to cultivate motivation with people on their team by doing a really simple thing. This is a little bit of a leadership hack, which is helping bring awareness to what they're working towards, a collective mission. Really important, and it gets oftentimes swept under the rug in terms of how important it is. But great leaders know how to continuously remind the team what they're working towards, why it matters, and why the job that's being done will impact that mission. But having that motivation aligned to the role, it creates that extra fire to push past the objections in the tough moments. Now, the other two things are some of my personal favorites. I'll save my favorite for last, but the next one is the adaptability or flexibility. Look, here's the truth of the matter. Many sales development reps work in environments that are not stable, large corporate companies. Some do, but most don't. Most work in environments that are startups. Startups by nature can change, and sometimes overnight. Earlier stage, the more change there typically is. Not always, sometimes big companies have a lot of change too. So that's more of a holistic way of thinking, that people who are going to do well can move and flow with the change. If you've never heard of the book, Who Moved the Cheese, or Who Moved My Cheese, it's a classic fable that was a bestseller from years ago about different types of people at work. One person who's like stuck in the old ways that can't change, and one person who's always ready to change. And the moral of the story is the same thing here. People who can move with the company and change with them can grow, and rising tides raise all ships. They will continue to rise with the raising tides, but people can't get stuck and their boats get heavy and sink. The last one is my favorite all time. There's a Yiddish word for this. It's called chutzpah. Try saying that 10 times fast. It basically means shameless audacity. Like, do I have enough chutzpah? It, by the way, usually meant something bad when I was a kid. My mom would be like, Ronen, you're so chutzpah. Like, don't talk back to me. Don't talk back to your teachers. It's chutzpah. It's like, you have the audacity to talk back to someone in an authority position. I want that in my SDRs. I want that in my AEs. You hear prospects say something dumb, call it out and tell them why it's dumb, and you will gain their respect, not lose it. Of course, this is a delicate dance. There's a way to do it that people won't be happy about, and there's a way to do it where you're like, oh, so we're peers. I see you eye to eye. So that last one is my all-time favorite. Shameless audacity, and in Yiddish that's called chutzpah. For this one, I'm gonna have to take you guys back almost 10 years. Wow, geez, 10 years. In 2014, Google asked a bold question, and they decided to actually pour millions of dollars into it. The question was simple. Why do some of our teams at Google consistently perform at the top 10, 5, and 1%? Consistently, even if people on the team changes, even if the job of the team changes, while other teams are inconsistent. What is it about those teams? And it's a great question, right? Because if they can crack that code, essentially what they're asking is, what makes for high performance teams? Now, when it comes down to it, great leaders, especially in sales, are very aware of these things. The name of this project, you could ironically Google it. It's called Project Aristotle. What they uncovered validated years of research done by a woman who's now fairly famous named Amy Edmonton. Amy had done research, I think at Harvard, years back about something called psychological safety. In fact, actually, her research didn't start with that. It started with failure. She wanted to know if when studying different teams, there's a correlation between failure rates and the performance of those teams. And her research came back. She tells this story really well on Dax Shepard. If you like his podcast, there's a bunch of books she's put out about it. She talks about how when her data came back, she was studying, I think it was a hospital, where failure actually could mean life or death. And the data came back, and she was horrified to find out after like years of work that it didn't corroborate her hypothesis. In fact, the data showed that the teams that seem to be considered high performers fail more. She's like, oh man, all my research is useless. And then she talks about this moment where she woke up in the middle of the night and she's like, oh, I just figured it out. The teams don't fail more. They feel safe to report their failures. The teams that don't perform well do not feel safe to report their failures. And there was born one of the most golden concepts of leadership. Probably the one thing, if any leader can work on this thing, you will have a higher chance of being successful. There are many studies that prove this. Millions of dollars, big corporations, tons of speakers who go on stage talking about this. Psychological safety. Feel free to Google it. But what psychological safety means and how to do it as a leader, it means that your environment that you create for your team is both safe enough where I can talk about things that didn't go well. Most cultures, about 80 to 90% of teams, have two other cultures that are not safe. They're cultures of conflict, a lot of fighting, or cultures of hiding, a lot of shame. Two things we don't want as leaders. But teams with a lot of psychological safety actually report more failures more often. And those failures, now Amy does go into talking about different kinds of failures. There's actually bad kinds of failures that you shouldn't celebrate. She calls them simple, there's complex, and there's learning failures. Simple failures are like, here's a 3-step process, follow this process. You didn't do it, well, that was dumb. Follow the process. Like, we know how this goes. Don't fail at that. Complex failures are when there's multiple variables. Like, this medication doesn't mix well with this medication and it killed someone. Well, it wasn't so simple as like knowing that they had the other one in the system. But then intelligent failures are celebratory worthy. These are the ones that Silicon Valley loves. This is what fail forward and fail fast is really about. It's not those other two. It's failing in a new area, something we don't know yet. Those failures, as Thomas Edison says, I didn't fail 2,000 times to make the light bulb. I learned 2,000 ways that the light bulb won't work. That's intelligent failure. And leaders who can cultivate that on the team, especially in a world where AI is taking over in sales, and we're going to have a lot of rapid learning in new areas, those are going to be the teams that you're going to see at the top, the Fortune 500. Those are the teams that are going to do well, overachieve on their quota. And it starts with creating an environment where people feel safe to do that. There's a lot of sales objections. I'm going to talk about in the context of cold calling, even though we can talk about actual sales, but let's talk about cold calling. My favorite all-time objection is can you email me? Just send me an email. I'm busy. I'm running into a meeting. How'd you get my number? Is this a cold call? Like, they're all the same. So there's two types of objections ever that you're going to get on a cold call, two categories. One category is called a brush off. Brush off objections are not an objection to what you're saying. They are an objection to the fact that you called. And so what that means is something about your tonality, the words you use, triggered what people call heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts. Another Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, they wrote the book called, I think it's called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, or Thinking Fast, Slow. Anyway, it's a book on economics and how people make decisions. And what they uncovered in their research that went into that book was, oh, we make a ton of decisions all the time automatically. And one of the decisions people make is during a cold call. Your phone rings, you don't know the number. You're immediately thinking, as most people who are normal think, oh, maybe my kid is in trouble. Maybe the doctor's calling me back. Maybe I am getting a call from a client. Answer the phone. And they hear someone on the other line go, hi, this is Ronen calling from Acme Corporation. How is your IT, product doing right now? And they're just like, oh my gosh, this is a salesperson. I don't want to talk to this person. I'm sorry, I'm running into a meeting. Hang up. What happened there is the heuristic was triggered, the shortcut, the mental shortcut. Now, here's the problem with heuristic thinking. This is what Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky proved. The problem with heuristic thinking is, although we need it every day in our lives and we use it all the time in great contexts, sometimes it leads to really bad decision making, and it's very error prone. There's lots of forms of this that exist, by the way. One of the ones that's been studied a lot by HR people is in hiring practices, heuristic thinking that people aren't even aware of, called, I think this one called bias something. But it's all about like, what biases do we have that we're not aware of that affect decisions we make about people we hire? But back to cold calling, here's an automatic thought. Now, here's the brilliance that you can do on a cold call that most people don't realize. It's you can break the pattern. You can trigger the opposite effect. The opposite effect of a heuristic, which is a mental shortcut that's automatic, is to do something that doesn't trigger that thought. And to do that, you have to use a pattern interruption. Now, a pattern interruption is not some fancy word, script, clever, like one-liner. It's not saying, do you have 27 seconds to tell you why I called? 27 is not a pattern interruption. It might sound unique, but it's not. The only type of pattern interruption that exists for cold calling that will forever work is the way your voice sounds. And this is why with most objections, brush-offs, I focus in on how do you sound right now? And I try to teach 3 good tones. There's only really 3. There's warm and friendly, there's confident and sharp, and then there's funny. Funny is very advanced, and people don't have the same sense of humor, so I usually don't start with that. Confident and sharp works really well for roles where people typically have a lot of technical roles in what they do. And the warm and friendly is really good for roles that require a lot of interpersonal skills like sales and marketing. So if I'm calling a salesperson, I'm gonna go with a warm and friendly tone. And I'll sound like this. Hey, Rita, how's it going? How have you been? Now, anyone who gets that on a call isn't going to immediately think, who's the salesperson? I don't want to talk to them. I now have your attention. I just won the first 3 seconds of the call, and I've now circumvented getting a brush off objection. But let's say we get into the call and now I'm getting real objections. That's the second category. The most common one you're going to get is I already have someone, some company I'm working with, something that I'm doing. The other one is I'm really busy. I'm actually like legitimately busy. Can you just email me and I'll get back to you? Let's go with the email one. My favorite response to that is, hey, look, Rita, I'm really happy to email you. Don't get me wrong. I'll send you 100 emails if it helps us talk. But I've been doing this a while, and I'm still waiting to hear back from all the people I've emailed. Would it be a terrible idea if instead we found 30 minutes on Monday? I have some time in the afternoon or even Tuesday morning where we could chat a little bit further about this. Now, the reason I love that response to the email me objection usually gets a laugh, which is like you win the game if you get your prospect laughing on a cold call. Also, it's logical. It makes sense. Like people kind of agree with it, and you're kind of calling out the fact that they don't really want the email. They're going to look at it. Some people will be like, no, I'll legitimately look at it and get back to you if I'm interested, which means you have to craft a good email because now you will get their attention on that. The other one with like, I've got something in place, which is a really common objection you're going to get in any industry that has a lot of competition, in any red ocean, if you know blue ocean, red ocean strategies, like where there's a lot of competitors. The strategy for that is something called a problem stack. So the idea is, I teach this when I do cold call training, but essentially the idea is to both probe the prospect and then provoke them. So you want to probe around a pain and then provoke them to think about what the world would be like without that pain. Now, if you say like, let's say I'm selling cold call training on a cold call, which I know is very meta, and I call the sales leader and I'm like, hey, when it comes to your sales team's pipeline, do they already have a way to guarantee that they're going to get one new meeting a day from cold calling? So that's the probing question, because I'm trying to ask something in a clever way that will say, hey, do you already have a way to do this thing that I think you want? And then if they say, well, yes, I do. I work with cold calling company trainers that are really wonderful. This is where the problem stack comes in. So this is the way to handle any kind of objection around we already have something. Oh, super happy to hear that you have that in place. Don't ask, how's it going? That's what everyone wants to do. Instead, say, just one more question for you. Pivot to a new problem. Just one more question for you. Look, when it comes to email copy, can you already guarantee that your team's going to get 15% reply rates? So now I'm going to get into a new topic. If I were to do email training, which I don't do, but that would be it. So I know that was a super long-winded way of saying like problem stacking is the way to shift to a new problem. You're going to look for something that person is kind of feeling a little bit of pain around. And you just do that by saying, just one more question for you. When it comes to this next pain, do you already have a way to solve that? I'll share some more general platitudes that are true with cold calling that are good, like beginner level things. First one, if you can stand. I know it sounds crazy, but standing has an energy to it. Sitting, you lose an energy. Don't forget the fact that our brains control how we feel, and how we feel controls how we sound. So how do we hack that? I'm always looking for hacks in life. And I don't mean hacks by a shortcut. I mean hacks by understanding. Like I want to understand myself better. Here's a great tip. There's a woman named Amy Cuddy. She put out a book called Presence. She had a viral TED Talk about confidence. It's crazy. She did a study. You can tell everything I do is science-backed, but she had a study where what she did, she wanted to know, can we cultivate and create confidence on command? Now, anytime you're talking about cold calling, you have to talk about the number one thing about cold calling that gets in people's way of doing it well. Feeling afraid, feeling nervous. Of course you do. It has all of the things we know about what causes fear. We know there's a list that you go on ChatGPT. What causes fear? You'll get a list of things and it's all cold call. I don't know the outcomes. People are going to yell at me. It's not safe. Like, right? So cold calling by nature is designed to suck and going to be really tough to do unless you know how to try to hack the other side of your brain, the part of your brain that cultivates confidence. So here's the thing I recommend. Stand up, Superwoman pose. Hands on hip, arms up in the air in a V-shaped victory. If you look up Usain Bolt after he wins a race, there's a picture of him like this with his arms up in the air. Hold that pose for 60 seconds. If you're alone, do it alone. Whatever, then pick up the phone and dial. If you're on a call, start doing it. What's going to happen is physiologically, you're going to trigger a neural reaction in your brain that says, I feel confident. It works just like that. It's the same effect as smile and dial. You can hear my smile in my voice when I'm smiling right now as I talk to you. Our physical presence, our bodies control our brains, and our brains control our hearts. And so, and it's all symbiotic, right? It all works together. Knowing how to use them to your advantage is a cold calling gift. So that's the one thing on confidence. The second thing I'll say is, look, no one has ever batted 1,000, made 100% of the shots they took. Understand what you're getting into with cold calling. Don't expect to go into it having a wonderful day where every conversation you have is going to turn into a meeting. Expect the opposite. Go for failure. Give yourself a challenge. Can I get 5 no's before lunchtime? Can I get told no 10 times today? Aim for the negative and it won't feel as bad. And what you'll essentially be doing is building a muscle of tolerance for the thing that gets in the way, which is the fear. Understanding that most cold calls end somewhere between like 3 and 12% converting from a conversation to a meeting leads you to realize that if I get 1 in 10, I'm actually doing not too bad. Now I've seen, and when I was collecting my own stats, because I'm kind of crazy, I was collecting my own data on like cold calls I made conversations. The highest level I ever achieved was around 42% conversation to meeting rate. And the only way that happened was constant, rigorous testing. I was super into, let's find the right words, let me find the right tone, let me keep trying it. Of course, if I message the right pain to the right persona and I get them on the right time, things work out. Last thing I'll say is you cannot beat macroeconomic trends. You cannot beat things that are not in your control. So control what you can control. Here's an example. Chet Holmes wrote a book. Chet Holmes was a famous sales trainer in the 90s, 2000s. He's no longer with us, but he's very much so remembered by the sales community, called The Ultimate Sales Machine. And in his book, he's famous for this one picture called the sales pyramid. And people have taken it and extrapolated it to the end of the universe. But what the sales pyramid teaches us is there's different groups of buyers at any point in a market. There's the top 2 to 3% of the pyramid who's actively looking for your solution. You get those folks on a cold call, that's a great day. Those are the easy calls. Then there's the next 6 to 7% who is thinking about it, but they might not be actively looking, meaning talking to someone. It means 10% of your market is in a buying cycle or about to be. What about the other 9 out of 10? This is where it gets really interesting. This is where I disagree with some people who've been in the space for a long time who say, just focus on those top 10%. I say, no, that's bonus. Let's focus on the next 30%, the next 30%, and ignore the bottom 30%. The bottom 30%, you'll never get. The next 30% up are people who think that they don't need what you have. And the next group up just isn't thinking about it. So those 2 groups, not thinking about it and they don't think they need what you have, are people that you can encourage to learn more if you actually pull them in, which is why my whole scripting approach uses this model of probe and provoke to try to poke on an actual pain, to get them curious enough to be like, all right, I'll learn more. So at the end of the day, the big lessons, cold callers, hack your body to feel confident, go for no when you're actually doing it, and realize that you're not going to win most of the cold calls. If you're hitting 10% conversation a meeting, you're doing great. And then know that the macroeconomics show us that that's true. 10% of your market at any given point is probably open to a conversation, which means 1 out of 10, and you're hitting the average right there. Okay, I have to give you 2 answers. So the one is the one that I'm most well known for. It's, hey, it's Ronen, and this is a cold call. You want to roll the dice? People love that one because I used it with a prospect and she just bursted out laughing as I said that. And that's one that I put on LinkedIn, and somehow I became known as the guy with the want to roll the dice opener. Unfortunately, if you try that, what you're going to notice is a lot of people don't find it too funny, and that's because people have different senses of humor. That goes back to something I said a while ago about the different types of openers. You can go with a comedic opener. If it lands, you're good. You're like in a good zone. You've brought down all the defenses. Now you're talking. But if it doesn't land, the person's going to be like, what? Do I want to do what? Who is this? Or sometimes they'll even say, no, I'm good. Bye. And like, that's okay. So if you're going to go for it, be ready to have a lot of folks that don't respond well to it. The one I actually use now is adapted from Sandler, legacy sales training organization and method that's been around forever. And the approach sounds like this. I start with just a very warm and friendly tone, which is like a hello. I just go, hey, Rita. Usually you go like, hey, who is this? Like, hey, Rita, it's Ronen here. Hey, look, I know nobody likes getting a cold call, especially not on a Wednesday afternoon Mind if I share why I'm calling, and then you can let me know if we should talk? Is that fair? So it's a permission-based opener that also uses a hint of humor in there, but very transparent, warm and friendly, and doesn't sound like a salesperson. I'm not trying to be pushy. I really leverage the warm and friendly tone for that one. The warm and friendly tone is the one I start with when I train people because it's the most accessible. We have a lot of examples of it. People have been telling us our whole lives, like our parents, be nice, be friendly. So we've heard what we should sound like, and we know what that doesn't sound like. So it's a good one to start with because it's easy to control and actually do well. Those are my two go-to. The second one is the one I actually use when I still cold call.